All right. All right. Okay, better. I don't know if this was a good idea. We'll try it out. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's 3 Prakim Rambam, dedicating this class Le'ilui Nishmas, Shimshon Nechemia, Olav Shalom ben Yeshua Karpel Shlita. We are learning Hilchos Sefer Torah, Prakim Ches, Tes, and Yud. Actually, Perek Yud will be the conclusion of the entire series of Hilchos Tefillin U'Mezuzah Sefer Torah. All 3 Prakim today will be about a Sefer Torah, and the 8th chapter has 4 halachas, all about the psuchos and the sesumos, as explained clearly by the Rambam what it means. And the Rambam is going to go through the entire Sefer Torah, going through every single of the 669 parshiyos, letting us know what's the psucha, which one is the sesuma, as well as the correct format of the 2 songs in the Torah, Shiras Hayam and Shiras Hazino. Let's begin. Perek Shmini, Halacha Aleph, says the Rambam. Parsha Psucha. There are 2 options of a Parsha Psucha. Number 1, Im Gomer Be'emsa Shita. If the prior Parsha ended in the middle of the line, then Maniach Shara Shita Pani, you leave the remaining of the line empty. Umaschala Parsha Shi Psucha Mitchilas Shita Shniya. Simple. And you begin the new Parsha from the new line, from the beginning of the new line. That if the prior Parsha ended in middle, that if you would have wanted to write more, there would have been the space to write at least 9 more letters. But if the prior Parsha, like we had the picture yesterday from the Mezuzah, was Taka did not end at the end of the line, but you did not have the space of 9 letters, or even more, Yim Gomar B'Seif Hashita, it happened to be that the prior Parsha ended mamash at the end, Maniach Shita Shniya B'Lo Iksav, according to the Rambam, you would leave an entire line open, an entire line blank. Umaschala Parsha Psucha Mitchilas Shita Hashlishis. In other words, Psucha will always begin from the beginning of a line. Do you have to skip a line or not? That will depend whether you have Kerevach Teisha Oisias blank on the line prior.
All of this is just about prettiness?
No, it has to be this way. Okay, let me give a quick bekitzer. What I was taught is that when Hashem taught Moshe Rabbeinu the Torah on Har Sinai, there were pauses where Moshe Rabbeinu reviewed. Wherever Hashem paused, that's where we have a new parsha. Why are some psucha and one sesuma is a big soid that I don't know. Right, halacha base. The meaning of a parsha sesuma, guys, all of this is Shitas Rambam. The Rosh argues with a lot of what we're learning right now. The Rambam holds there are 3 options of a parsha sesuma. Option number 1, im gomer be'emsa shita. If you finish the prior parsha middle of the line, maniach revach kishir, you leave this 9 empty space, 9 letters empty space, and you begin on the same line to write at least 1 word from the new parsha, that is the parsha sesuma. That's option number 1. You will find, and you'd have to leave the 9 letters blank in middle. Option number 2, if you don't have from the prior parsha enough space to leave 9 empty spaces, and actually even if you have 9 empty spaces, you have to write on the same line at least 1 word. Happens to be that some words are 2-letter words. Doesn't matter. But you don't have 9 empty spaces and space for 1 word. So then leave the entire line blank. And when you begin the second line, like we saw a picture yesterday from the Mezuzah, you don't have to leave 9 empty spaces in the beginning because you have it in the line above, but don't begin it from the beginning of the line. I know that Rambam writes the words Be'emsa Shita Shniya. Clearly, all of the Noisei Kelim say Be'emsa is Lav Davka. Not only is it not Be'emsa, you don't even need L'Rambam 9 letters. Be'emsa means not in the beginning. Not in the beginning. Option number 3, v'im gomer b'seif hashita, if you mamish finish the prior parsha at the end of the line, maniach mitchil hashita shniya b'kishir harevach, then you leave total 9 letters empty. Here you have to leave 9 because you left nothing on the line above. Here again, me'emsa, you see clearly the word me'emsa in the Rambam doesn't mean in the middle. Because what did we learn yesterday? You learned that a line should be comprised of enough space to write 30 letters. My friends, 9 letters is not the middle of 30. 15 is the middle of 30. It means not from the beginning. Comes out, Parsha Pesucha Tchilasa B'tchila Hashita Lo'olam. The Pesucha will always begin in the beginning of a line, even though there are 2 options. There might be a complete blank line, but the Pesucha will begin in the beginning, and the Parsha Sasuma will always begin. Me'emsa means from not the beginning of the line. The Rosh argues, again, just to know the words, the Taz makes a pshara between the Rambam and the Rosh, and the Alter Rebbe argues with the Taz by saying that this pshara, God forbid, can actually be, as we say, kareach mikan v'kareach mikan. Certain compromises means not like the Rambam, not like the Rosh, and therefore, let's go. We who follow the sheet of the Alter Rebbe, when it comes to putting on tefillin, to make sure that it was following the shita of the Alter Rebbe when it comes to psuchais and sasumais. Halacha Gimel. Sefer she'eino muga b'mali v'chasen. Mali v'chasen, my friends, is not psucha and sasuma. Is that, like we mentioned, some letters are like vowels. It could be fixed, as we explained yesterday in Perek Zayin, Halacha Yud Beis and Halacha Yud Gimel. Avol im toberavacha parshiyos. What is unfixable if you did not properly, align the writings, psucha and sasuma, and the person wrote psucha into a sasuma, or the opposite of sasuma psucha, or you made a new parsha. God never made this into a parsha. You chose to make it either this or that, psucha suma, or shekasav kedarkoi, or you did not give a break where there had to be a break. Or when you formatted the writing of both of the songs in the Torah, which is Shiras Hayam and or Shiras Hazino, you did not do it properly, then harei zeh pasul. You have to remove the entire column, rewrite the column. The worst case scenario, you get rid of the whole yidiyah, which you don't have to do. And the mile, at least, of the Sefer Torah is that you can write it shaloi kedarkoi. So it doesn't matter that you already wrote the following column and the next column. You can go back and fix whatever, which is how we fix today's Sefer Torah. Final halacha dalet. Ulefi shiraisi shibush gadol, says the Rambam, and since I saw big confusion and many mistakes, and guys, let's not forget that the Rambam is of the opinion that ideally you should write your own Sefer Torah. I'm talking to myself. Think about that. We live once, v'mizakt, chaparayim. Imagine the experience, ki'ilu kiblu mahar Sinai. It's like a big thing. The Rambam wrote a Sefer Torah because according to him, the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah, muhudar, ideally is not to hire a Sefer, to write it yourself. So the Rambam says, I saw many people making mistakes. Even those who are more knowledgeable, there's arguments amongst them. Everyone is using the Sefer. My Zayder wrote the Sefer, and I know he copied it off. We have different, when it comes to Psuchas and Sasumas, there was a difference of opinions. So what did the Rambam do to fix it? The Rambam paskent how it should be written, and he incorporated in the Sefer Yad HaChazaka all of the parshas in the Torah, the Psuchas and the Sasumas. Re'isi lichtov heino kol parshas ha-Torah ha-Sasumas va-Psuchas, and the correct way of formatting both of the songs in the Torah, kedei l'saken aleim kol hasvarim ulhagia mehem. Everyone should be magia the Sefer Torah from the Sefer Yad HaChazak.
What are you supposed to do with your Sefer Torah?
They have to be goines them. You don't put them in there because since they don't have the kedusha of a Sefer Torah, they may not be used to read from them in public.
So you leave them at home.
So you bury them. The Sefer shesamachnu all of dvarim elu.
Sorry, the one you write.
Oh, the one if you were to write it, if it's kosher, then you use it. If you want to, leave it in your house. The Sefer shesamachnu all of dvarim elu. No, it's according to the Rosh, it's about learning from it. According to the Rambam, it's pashut a mitzvah to write it. Oh, so how the Rambam is saying, and where do I get my information from? Why am I so certain that my writing will be correct? Hu Sefer hayadua b'Mitzrayim shu koilol arba ve'esrim svarim. There was a Sefer that for a while was found in Egypt, and it had not only the Chamisha Chumshe Torah but the entire Tanakh or the 24 Sfarim, which is the entire Tanakh. This Sefer was Hoye B'Yerushalayim, Mikam Shonim Lahagiyah Mimenu Asfarim. It was in Yerushalayim, and it was used as the source to be Magiyah many Sifrei Torah. Va'olov Hoyu HaKoil Samchem. Everyone relied on that. I know there's not enough time right now, but after the Shir, it's Kedai. You can Google either the Crown of Aleppo, or the Bible Codex, or the Codex of Aleppo, or the Crown of Aram Tsoiva, and you'll find the history of this amazing Tanakh. And it was pushed almost entirely intact until 1947, when there were riots in Syria against the Yidden, and a shul was burnt down. The shul that housed the synagogue of Aleppo had in it this, they called it the crown of the city. And what happened is that right now, big part of it is in a museum in Israel. Many people thought that part of it was burnt, and most of us suspect that none of it was burnt. I know that a few years ago, I spoke about it here in the shul, when they found from a taxi driver, he had one page. There are people, there are families that they saved it from the riots, they took it, and we have to simply put it together. And we hope that the entire Sefer is intact. We just have to be Mekabetz Nidchei Yisrael over here. Now, who wrote it? So the Rambam calls him that it was Muga by a Yid called Ben Asher. We know that the actual person who checked it over was a Jew by the name of Aaron ben Moshe. But this was done at the time that Yidden knew from what Shevet they come from, and he came from the tribe of Asher. And he called himself Ben Asher. And Lahoy Stam, when it comes to the Sfarim, right, Asher. Stam is one of the ways you remember the 9 Oisias. The digdig by Shanim Harbe, and it's not only that he himself kept on checking it over. V'higia pa'amim rabbis k'moy shehetiku. He kept on checking it and fixing all of the nuances. Now, the beauty about the Codex, about the crown, the Keser Aram Tsoiva, that's the way Yidden called it, is that it has in it all of the Nekudas and it has in it all of the Tamim. It's not a scroll, it's like a book, but I think it's on parchment and there are designs on it. It's beautiful. Maybe Kevin will find a picture. There's a lot about the Sefer. And the Olav Samachti b'Sefer HaTorah shekasafti kilchasai. So what are we going to do right now is that I fully believe that when we are to learn the entire Torah in the context of Yidiyas Kol HaTorah Kola, even if we don't memorize it, we should really be reading all of it. But since we have to daven Shachris before Chatzos, so everyone, including myself, I'm going to be reading all of it together. But I'll read a little bit of it, and the rest of it we should be mashlam ourselves later. So what the Rambam is doing right now is a few things just from the beginning of Sefer Bereshis. You'll notice that Rambam does not begin with the words Bereshis bara Elokim, even though it begins in the beginning of the line. The Rambam does not consider the opening pasuk of all and any of the 5 Chamishay Torah as a opened or a closed parsha, because that's the beginning of a Sefer. So the beginning of a Sefer is a category of its own. So when would you have the beginning? When do you have a first parsha? What the Amaretz will call the second parsha in the Torah. So as you'll see in the Torah, the first day is not counted. Another detail: whenever you have juxtaposed one to the other parshiyos that begin with the same words, like for example in the account of creation, every day begins with Vayomer Elokim. So the Rambam cannot write Vayomer Elokim. He writes the next words Yehirakia to differentiate between Yehirakia and Yekavo Hamayim. But what the Rambam will do, okay, just so once you get that, so you're not going to have the first of every chumash is b'chlal not oilam in aminyan, and whenever you're going to have parshas one after the other, where they begin with Vayemer Hashem, Vayedaber Hashem, he's not going to quote that because you'll be confused. He writes the next unique words. So just to begin reading Techapsa, Yehirakia is going on to say that he's not going all the psuchais and then backwards all the sesumais. He's going one by one by one. Yehirakia, Yekavu Hamayim, Yehimo Oires, Yishutsu Hamayim, Toisi Oretz, Vayichulu, Eloto Shmaim Oretz, the psuchais. 7, the Rambam mamish everything with numbers. Elo Isha Amar, Elo Adam Amar, Shteim Sumais. Vayemer Hashem Elokim Psucha, Va'adam Yada as a Sefer, Vayishes, Vayenesh, Vaykein Levim Halom, Vayered, Vayichi Chanoich, Vayichi Mishuselach, Vayichi Lemach, Vayichi Noach. These 11 parshas, the Sumais. And like this, the Rambam goes through the entire Sefer Bereshis, and I do want to read, I'm going to read it later, Pasha, to read the whole Torah, reading the Rambam. But the Rambam writes at the end, I know for people who have the Chayenos, Danny's not happy. Why is Danny not happy? Okay. Is there a sound issue? Okay. I'm sorry with the Zoom camera. Okay, we'll fix it tomorrow. Okay, minyan hapsuchais. The total number of psuchais in the Chumash Bereshis is 43. Is 48. 43. I'm sorry. Shloshim va'arboim. The number of parshiyos sumais in the entire Chumash of Bereshis is 48, and the Rambam makes a sachakel. The total of parshiyos altogether is 91. Then the Rambam begins ve'elu shemais, and here again you'll see by the book of Shemais, right, that the Rambam calls Sefer not Shemais. Ve'elu Shemais, Sefer Bereshis, ve'elu Shemais. The Rambam doesn't begin with the opening ve'elu Shemais b'nei Yisrael, because the Rambam, that's not called a parsha psucha, even though it begins in the beginning of the line, because it's the beginning of a Sefer. The first parsha is Vayakam Malachadash. And at the end of Eila Shemois, the Rambam writes, Minyan Apsuchais is 69, the Minyan Asasumais is 95, Sachakoil of Eila Shemois is 164. Now, guys, 164 and 91 is 255. We'll add it up. That's where we're up to. Sefer Vayikra, again, Vayikra El Moshe is not written. Ve'imen Atzoin is the first parsha, which is a parsha sasuma, which means it does not begin right in the beginning, in the beginning of the line, and at the end of Sefer Vayikra, the Rambam writes that the minyan of parshiyos that are psuchais in the entire Sefer Vayikra is shtayim v'chamishim 52. The number of parshas sasumas is 46. Sachakoil is going to be 98. So let's add up together. So when you have 255 and 98, you have 353. The Rambam calls the fourth Sefer B'midbar Sinai. Stam Lahoyer. I know it's called Chumash HaPikodim. We call it B'midbar, but the correct is to call it the way the Rambam calls it. That's called B'midbar Sinai. And at the end, the Rambam writes that the number of Parshiyos Pesuchais is 92. The numbers of Parshiyos Esumas is 66. The Sachakoil of the Sefer B'midbar Sinai is 158. We were up to 353. Rabbi Chaim is here, the math. 353 and 158, we're up to 511. Now the final Chumash in the Torah, which is called the Eila Hadvarim, beginning with the second, whatever. The Rambam calls it the first Parsha Vayoyim and Hashem Elai. So the minyan of Psuchais Shal Sefer Zeh is 34. The minyan of Sasumais is 124. Now, what did I say? That I heard that Psuchais and Sasumais is when Hashem told it to Moshe Rabbeinu, when he taught it to him. That has to be incorporated in that beard over here, because the final Chumash, Kaviyachol Moshe Mepi Atzmai Amra. It's a repetition of the Torah. And so that's the Stam Lahoyer, that sheds insight. It's not so simple to say that Hashem stopped and that's where he made a Chazara. Moshe Rabbeinu was saying this Parsha. Also Lahoyer, that in this Parsha, the difference between Psuchais and Sasumais, the ratio is the most. I'm not saying which one is more. Stam, that there's only 34 of one and there's 124 of this other. Stam. And the total, he writes, is 158. So Chevra, 511 and 158 totals 669. That's the sum total number. So the Rambam therefore Taka writes, the entire Psucha is 290. The entire Sasumais of the whole Torah is 379. The total of all Parshas in the Torah is 669. The Rambam continues, Tzuras.
It's really important to the Rambam that we know all these numbers.
The Rambam made everything in numbers because the Rambam felt that when you number things, you remember it. And then when you count it, if you've made a mistake, you'll chop it because of the number won't match. Right. The way you learn is through number. Like we learned before, if you skip over a parsha, or if you make something that was not a parsha into a parsha, passes the whole Sefer Torah. So count the Sefer Torah that you wrote and make sure it's 669, loy pachus v'lo yoser. Numbers help.
Or is this just a good way?
No, that's the way that Rambam learns. You learn Torah. Yeah, okay. Tzuras, Shiras, Azinu. It's interesting also that the Rambam doesn't begin Allah say that everything has a reason. The Rambam here begins with Hazino, not with Shiras Hayam. Maybe because he just left off with the Chumash of Eila Hadvarim. Tzuras Shiras Azinu kol shita v'shita yesh be'emtza revach echad kitzuras haparshas asuma. You have to leave a 9-letter break in the middle of every line, and just a lahoid. It doesn't have to be exactly 9 letters. In many Sifrei Torah, it's more than 9 letters. It means it cannot be less than 9 letters. The nimsa kol shita chaluk l'shtayim. Every line of Azinu will be divided into 2. The koisvin oisa, just like the Rambam by the Mezuzah wrote the 22 lines. So here by Hazinu, he's writing, he should write it in 70 lines. And now the Rambam is going to write, these are the letters that are in the beginning of every line. The Rambam is beginning not the right side of the line and the left side of the line. The Rambam is going to formulate the whole Shiras Hazinu, which are all of these 7 Shitas, all the right, just the right, and then the Rambam is going to go through just the left. And I remember clearly hearing Torah how you can learn Pshat that way in the whole Shita. You can read the whole right column and make it work. And you can then read the whole left column. And I heard Gavaldik Toidas, but En Kanamakim to share at least one, but it works the whole thing. So what's the right line? If people here who have a tikkun, so it's Hazinu, Yarov, is that correct? Hazinu, Yarov, Kasi'irim, Ki, Hatzur, Keil, Shichas, Al Hashem, Haloi, Zechoir, Sha'al, Bahanchal, Yatziv, Ki, Yim, Se'eyu, Sevevenu, Kedneshe, Yifres, Hashem, Yarkeveo, Vayakineo, Chemas, B'nei, V'dam, Shomanta, Vayinabel, B'Seyev, V'Selikim, Loi, Vatishkach, Mikas, Erabanim, Ki, Hasunim, B'Goy, Vatikat, V'Talayit, Chatzi, Chitzai, V'Ketev, Im. ובחדורם יוניק אשביסה פן ולוי ואין יבינו ושניים והשם ויבינו ומשד מויס אשקלויס ורויש חסום לאיס וחוש ועל ואפס צור ישתו יהי ואין וחצתי כי אם אשב אשקיר מדם הרנינו ונקם. These are the Rashi tables on the right line. ואלה התיבות שברויש חצי שורה אחרינו שממסע דף, and they are in the other 70 וסישמע תיסל קרביבים הובו כי צדיק דויר עמהו בינו זקנך בפרידה למספר יעקב וסויו ינסרנו על יסואהו ואין ויויכל ושמן im vayishman vayitrish vayakni uhu isbuchu chadoshim sur vayar vayomer ki heimani ki vasoichel aspe mizei v'shen michutz gam amarti luli pen ki lu echa im ki anovem chamas haloi li ki v'omar asher yukomo ro ani ve'ein v'amarti v'soiches v'lomesanai v'charpi meroish ki v'chiper. Very good. Now Shiras Hayom they should be written in a total of 30 lines. However, unlike the Shiras Hazinu, this is how you do it. The first line has to be written Kedarka. Whoever's having the Chayenu, it didn't work the format. You turn your page over and you'll see the first line of Hazinu, of the Oz Yashid, take a look, is written regular. No breaks in it. That's the first line. All the other lines, this is how it works. Achas manichen be'emsa revach echad. The second line, you're going to have a revach of 9 letters. The achas manichan revach b'shnei mekoymes be'emsa. And the other line, and a Rambam doesn't mean dafka which one comes first. It's alternating. One will have 1 break and one will have 2 breaks. When you have 2 breaks, it's going to come out that line will be divided into 3. The nimsa, the goal that we are looking for is to have revach, keneged haksav, ukeneged harevach, v'zui tzurasa. So the Rambam Pashat spelled it out. He wrote it out, and you can turn whoever has the chayenu, you can take a look over here, and you can see how it's like brickwork. So you'll see that wherever you have letters in one line, underneath it and above it, you have an empty space. Says the Rambam like this: Kol atayda kula bein bashiros bein misharaksav yischaven sheitiyeh ois smucha lechaver tebi yosef. Make sure the letters are very close to each other, but don't have them touch one the other. That will invalidate it. But on the other hand, don't make them too distant. The Rambam already wrote this. The space should be kechut ha'sa'ara. And how do you know that? Because you show it to a child that doesn't understand the meaning of the word. So he doesn't use context to right away clarify what it means. He just knows the form of the letters. And when he looks at it, he thinks it's 2 words when it's really 1 word. Then that Torah is pasal ache yisakein. That concludes Perek Shmini. And now we are going, Chavra, my friends, to Perek Chi. Perek Chi is going to speak about, my friends, the concept of writing a Sefer Torah in the most beautiful way that you could. The focus here won't be about the beautification of the letters, but it's going to be about the entire scroll. And we're going to primarily learn the rule of arkoi kehekefai. The word arkoi means length. When we use the word arkoi, I'm going to say this once, we really mean the height of the Sefer Torah. The word hakefai means the circumference, not the diameter. The Rambam is going to write that the ideal height of a Sefer Torah is 6 tfachim. This is really very much connected to the size of the luchos, even though the Rambam doesn't write it, so explain the commentators. The luchos were actually a cube when you put both of them together. Write 6 by 6 by 6, but let's go to a Sefer Torah. You have a scroll. If the height, which he calls the length, of every parchment is going to be 6 tfachim, we want to aim that when we finish writing the entire Sefer Torah, if it would be rolled in 1 roll, not the way we have it in the Aron HaKodesh, 2 Eitz HaChaim. without any sticks, just rolling it within each other, the circumference should be 6 tfachim. So just to say how you take a material that doesn't stretch. The Rambam speaks about taking a silk thread. Today it can be a measuring stick, and wrap it around the circumference. And when you open it up, it should be 6. So it's 6 by 6. This is not ma'akev, but this is part of what the Rambam wrote, that you write it, the ksiva of Sefer Torah should be na'a b'yoyser, it should be very beautiful. This is part of the beautification of a Sefer Torah. And the Rambam here also will technically tell us how you do that. Because every type of parchment has a different amount of thickness. You have a gvil, you have a klaf. How do you chap? Now one thing, the Rambam will give a formula, but you'll have to know some information about the whole Sefer Torah in your head to use this formula, but knowing some knowledge, using this formula, everyone will hit the orkoi ke'akefe. Perek Shi has 15 halachas, let's begin. Ein ois halacha aleph. Ein ois in Sefer Torah, loy orkoi yoiser ala kefe, v'loy kefe yoiser al orkoi. We aim, lachatchila, not to make the height bigger than the entire circumference, nor do we want for the end, for the circumference to be greater than the height. Now, how much should we make a Sefer Torah in its orkoi? And chevra, nothing here is ma'akev. We know many small Sefer Torah. The Melech who always carried a Sefer Torah with him, l'chayra, did not have a Sefer Torah that had 6 tfachim. Our Sefer Torah and the Aron Kodesh have 6 tfachim. You think it's more because the Eitz HaChaim protrudes from the top, it protrudes from the bottom, then you put a crown on top. We know that Rebbe Sefer Torah, the amazing stories about that Sefer Torah, how they went through Mesiras Nefesh Yidden over there in the gulags in Russia. But if you make a Sefer Torah beautiful, then you should lachatchila aim for that 6 tfachim. So by gvil, if you're making it out of gvil, which is very thick, so then you make it 6 tfachim. Just to know, I'll say this once, there's a machlekes, how much is a tefach? It's anywhere between 21 and 26 inches. Nothing wrong to approximate 24 inches. Because
That's an amma.
Not one tefach. That's 6 tefachim, right?
6 tefachim, yeah. 6 tefachim turns out to be 24 finger breadths, and I'm going to go generally a finger breadth, which is the width of a thumb, is 1 inch, even though it's not exactly, it's between 21 and 26. Shem arba ve'esrem etzbois b'rechav hagudel shel yad. Now, ubeklaf, see the challenge is like this, when you're using gevil, we already explained, gevil is the hide that was not split into 2, so it's thicker. So it has everything to do with the thickness of every page, because you want to get to the circumference should be the same amount. When you're using klaf is much skinnier. Now, you can really modify it by making the letters bigger, by making the letters smaller, ein chanami. But when the Rambam, who said before that you write a Sefer Torah on the gvil, I'm assuming that Rambam's Sefer Torah was written himself on gevil. That's what he writes lachatchila to do it. That's where it's the easiest to hit it with the normal, regular size letters. The moment you're using klaf, you can go less, you can go more. The ikir is that arkoi ke'akefei. V'ushiyeh arkoi ke'akefei. V'cheinam, even if gevil, if you made it shorter than 6 tfachim, but then you made the letters smaller, right? Because if you would make the letters average, you would need to have more letters or more yediyos, right? More parchments, and then the hekef would be bigger than the arkoi. Umiyatas aksav. Or if you made the height of every parchment more than 6, and you made the ksav bigger, that's fine. In other words, he's writing 6. Again, I think it's connected to the luchas. That's what I remember hearing. The luchas were 6 tfachim. But the ikid of the beautification is that the arkoi ke'akefei, that is the mitzvah. Halacha base. Shira gilim l'mato. Now remember like this. When you take a parchment, first of all, every parchment is going to have various columns. We already said the word daf means a column. He's going to write the minimum and the maximum columns. Ideal. When you write a column, you have to leave a margin on the top and the bottom. The Rambam is for some reason beginning with the bottom. The margin in the bottom has to be 4 finger breadths. Let's go 4 inches approximately. And above 3. The chain, ubein daf ladaf, in between every column, you want to have the width of 2 finger breadths. Therefore, tzarech sheniach b'tchilas kol yediyah. Ubaseifa, right, you're going to be putting different yediyos together. You're putting different parchments together. So you have to sew them. So, since you have to have between every column 2 finger breadths, even when one column is on the last one of one yediyah, and the other column will be the first of the other one, you want to have the same 2. It should be symmetric. you have to know how much parchment do you need for the sewing. Everyone has their own amount. It's more or less the same. So you have to make sure that the amount that you need for the sewing plus 1 finger breadth on one. The other one should have, in the beginning of it, the amount that you need for the sewing, which will be covered over, and 1. So when you sew them together, there should always be the 2. And uchedei tefida, the Rambam doesn't give an amount because everyone, uses a little bit of a different amount of parchment for the sewing area. What we're aiming for is that shenimsa, that kisha yispoid hayiriyah, when you will sew it, even though you went from parchment to parchment, it's going to be the same 2 etzba'is. Yeh ben kol daf adaf, b'chol ha-sefer kol shtei etzba'is. And aside of that, you also have to have extra parchment, al ha'amud, to have something to roll around. The amud is what we call the Eitz HaChaim or the Atzei HaChaim, and the Rambam is going to actually write later how much space he left for his Sefer Torah. The Chol Hashiyurim Ha'elu, everything we're learning now is L'mitzvah, which is ideal, it's the most proper manner, but when it comes to a halacha test, the Hekefoi, Orkoi, Kehekefoi, Vim Chised, Oy Hoisid, Loi Pasel. Now that Rambam is giving people practical advice, technical advice, how to achieve this goal. Ketzad Yischaven Adam Achiyasa Sefer Shiarke Kefoi. The Rambam writes the steps. First of all, Maschil Umerabeya Ha'oidus B'Shava. You're going to start making parchment. Again, just quoting Gedoyla Kama Gedoyla Masa Rabchia. Rabchia made parchment. Mustama the Rambam made the parchment. It's a mitzvah. That means he was the one, he skinned the animal and he tanned it. And another nukuda, just a chap over here. It's worthwhile. It takes a while to chop it. When the Rambam writes the word roichav here means when you cut the hide, what is then the width will turn into your height. The Rambam never spoke about the width until now, and he's going to speak about it later when it comes to how many columns. Why should the width be 6 tvachim? Because when you are cutting the hide in the tannery, what you cut as the width, you will then turn, and that's going to become the height. Everything will fit now. Make sure that every single piece of parchment has the same size. Okay, now there's a certain amount of approximation that you're going to have to do. Is like first you're going to cut the amount that you think you need to write a whole Sefer Torah. Take all of the blank parchments, right, at 6 tvachim. You take all of the blank parchments and roll them together. You, before beginning to write, take these 6 tvachim roichav, which now becomes the height, roll them together, and first hit the circumference like the height. Like this, you'll know, I have to finish the whole Sefer Torah in here. You're beginning backwards. Then, I'll say it by heart, it's very simple. Then you begin to experiment by writing a column, and then you have to know by heart how many columns of this do you need in the Torah, and will they fit in, or do you have to make the letters bigger or the letters smaller? No, the goal is to figure out the size of the letters, the way you write, and cheshbon, that all of that should fit into this. First you make the Hekefei Ka'erkai. It's not like you're building the Brooklyn Bridge from both sides. Will they align or not? You're mazal. You make that Hekefei Ka'erkai, and now you have to accordingly fit your size letters. Make one coil that's very tight. Even though the truth is, my friends, the Sefer Torah will never be on one Eitz HaChaim, but this Hekefei Ka'erkai is when it's rolled around itself. Keep on adding, keep on winding, until you hit the width, the entire circumference, not diameter. The circumference should be the same amount of the height. How do you know that? So another technical thing that Rambam, we'll see this in other areas, silk, even though shani means red, whenever we speak about shani over here, it means silk, shani, and silk does not stretch in comparison to the other wool types of threads that they had. So like this, when you wrap the silk cord around the hekev and you open it up, that's the circumference, and you want it to be exactly the height of the parchments. Now begin experimenting. Then the Rambam says, make a ruler. You make your own ruler, because when you want to experiment, you don't want to be just a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. How much smaller? So he's describing making a measuring stick. Take a kana, sheyeh arka 40, 50, what's that called? Make a yard. Macha yard. Right? It's 40 again. Huh? Make a yardstick. That's what I meant. Mamash. No, don't only make a little mark on this stick every etzba, which will be today the inch, but then make every half an inch, every quarter inch, every eighth of the inch. It's mamash a yardstick. And begin with how many finger breadths does your height have? Because you want to know the height, which is the length. You want to know exactly how much it is. Because in this, like we mentioned before, you're leaving, I think it was 4 in the bottom, right? And 3 empty in the top. Then there's going to be the 2 in between each columns. Now begin making the columns. Now you begin experimenting. Don't use this. Don't touch these. Don't begin writing until you got exactly the size of your letters. But take other parchments that have exactly this size. How many do you take? That Rambam held that after 2 or 3 parchments, you'll get it right. That Rambam was very intelligent. Maybe people like us need to have more than that. Say that. I want to tell you that right now all this was done for us because like I mentioned, every Sefer Torah is the same. And everyone copies the same size letters. So they don't have to do this. But in the beginning, that's how they did it. So you take 2 or 3 other parchments. Livdek mehem shir aksaf to make sure you get the right size of your writings. And you write an entire column. Now the Rambam writes, we know that the length of a daf is going to be 17 etzbois. Guys, why is that? The Rambam already said. Because if you have to leave in the margin 7 empty, 4 in the bottom and the top, so how many etzbois do you have left? You have 17. 17 and 7 is 24, right? That's what we're saying. We're saying that the height is 24 etzbois. The roich of hadaf, but how wide will every column be? That's up to you. What did we say yesterday? 30 letters, but how big is the letter? So every one will have a different size column. And that will affect, will you finish that entire coil or will you not finish it? If you won't finish it, you're going to have to write bigger letters. Push it. Another detail, Chavre, we learned that where can we vary? Where is there room to maneuver? It's not just the thickness of the letters, because the thickness of the letters affect the height of the letters. That Rambam already wrote that in every daf, you're going to have between 48 and 60 lines. In the 17 etzbois, that will depend on the size. And we're not giving it exact. We cannot give an exact number. 48, 60. Why not give an exact number? Because if you're using klaf, you're using gevil, all of that will affect it. Whereas if the parchment is thicker, then it takes less rolls to come to the same height. So therefore, if it's less, your letters will have to be smaller. If your letters are smaller, you're going to have more lines. If the parchment is skinnier, then you're going to need more parchments to get Hakefer Kiyarkai. So your letters will have to be not only wider, but bigger. Then you'll have less lines. That's the difference.
Back then, when you made the parchment, I mean, now with machines, probably doesn't work. But how does each piece the same today?
So more or less. And as you make it, it's more or less the same. But it doesn't matter because the goal will be is that you know how many parchments you have. It's all blank. You have to know your size writing. You know how many columns will you need to finish the Sefer Torah. The Rambam doesn't give that number because there isn't a standard amount of columns because it has to do with your letters. If you're putting 48 lines or you're putting 60 lines. But that cheshbon you have to do on your own. The chachma of the Rambam is that he's telling you first get all the parchments, then trial, and then you approximate for this type of writing, I will finish it at the end, not before, not later. If I'm writing it too big, I'm going to need more parchments. If I'm writing it too little, I won't finish until the end. Okay, you got it. The number of lines will depend. After you write one column, now begin measuring. And you measure hadaf betzboi sakana, because the modification, my friends, sometimes will be a half a etzba, sometimes the modification will be an eighth of an etzba, but here he wants you to use a yardstick. It should be exactly. Don't forget, he says, to add between every column there's going to be 2 fingers. The yachshiv, and now you have to cheshbon. Today you have computers, then you needed the Rambam. Now this cheshbon is tough. Today a computer does it very quick. Computer will tell you, I got to make every letter a millimeter bigger. According to the size of your letters, it's gavaldik. How much will you need to use all of the parchments up? The V'yira kama nichtav v'daf zeh shebadik b'ay min ha'Torah kula u'meshayir lefi ha'sefer shu kosev u'mimenu u'mechashev. Yavaldik. All right. If you already got it right, good for you. But if there's going to be too many columns, in other words, to finish that, you'll have empty columns to finish the whole thing. Then you have to adjust. You have to make your ksav a little bit bigger. And then do it again. Make another column. In other words, you're going to be going through a couple of columns. Don't write a line. Don't write an entire column. That's the only way to do it. And then you see how many psukim went in here. You know the length of the Torah. The parshas psuchas and sasumais are also part of the cheshbon because you have the numbers of letters that are empty, and sometimes it's a line. All of that. That's why this comes at the end. After you know how to write it with all of the dinim, now cheshbon. Then what happens if? You're going to need more columns. But if you're going to add more columns, then the hekef is going to be more than the oirach. Then you have to minimize. You might aksav. Keep on making columns. Write a column. Until you come to the right. No, this size will go exactly until the end. Since you know the width of every daf, of your column, and you know the size of your letter, has to do with the width of the daf, the size of the letter. Then you can begin writing. Now that you know the size, because guys, the size has to do, when you make sirtut, you have to know how wide to make the sirtut, how much space between one sirtut and the other. So first get the right size. You get the width. Now begin to be mesartet. And what happens if you're going to have 3 or 4 finger breadths at the end of a parchment? Now, what's the problem with that? The problem with that is that you cannot fit another column in there. So, what you do is, you don't even worry about it now. You add, if there's no more room for another column in this blank parchment, now that you know how wide every line of yours will be, all you need to do now is add the finger, add the amount that you need for the sewing, and cut off the rest. So when you prepare your Sefer Torah prior to beginning, you're going to be cutting off a lot. But don't worry about it, because whatever you cut off here, you're going to add later with new yiriyos. And it's going to come to the same thing at the end. Don't be afraid. I got it now. The coil is exactly if I'm going to start cutting off, doesn't matter. Now that you made the cheshbon backwards and you know the size of the letters and the height of the lines and how many lines you're going to have in every column, according to your writing, now you don't have to worry about cutting things off. Now prepare the yiriyos, because whatever you're cutting off here, you'll have to add at the end. You're going to have to add it later. So you're going to end up with the same. The only beauty now is that you're going to fit all of your columns in the yiriyos. Now you're going to start customizing what we call the reichav of the yiriyos. So all of these things are prepared prior to writing. And you already know, you had that projection that when you're going to come to the end of this yiriyah, it's going to finish. You're going to finish at the end of the column, and you're going to have only the one etzba vacuum plus the amount you need for the sewing. Don't worry about this. The writing will cause, ultimately at the end, for you to have the right amount of columns, because once you know how many columns you need to finish up this type of klaf, hekefoi ka'arkoi and arkoi ka'kefoi, now you're good. I don't mind losing some of these parchments. You're right, as long as the ones that you replace them with are more or less the same, and they're more or less the same. Gevil is gevil, and klaf is klaf. Halacha 8. It's late. The Rambam writes, the same cheshbon is going to be done if for whatever reason, see here again, the Rambam writes about the roichav ha-sefer. Roichav ha-sefer, what it means is like I told you, roichav ha-sefer means the roichav of the parchment in the tannery will become the height in the Sefer Torah. And so if you want to make it bigger or smaller, doesn't matter, do the same cheshbon. Al derech hazeh machashiv. Whatever size you're going to make, get blank yiriyos, coil them together. First get hekefer kiyorkai. Then experiment by writing columns. Whole daf. Then you have, that's the part that the Rambam can describe. The cheshbon, how many of these dafim will you need to come to the end? Will it fit? Will it not fit? The Rambam writes, don't make a mistake in the cheshbon, because like we mentioned, there's this approximation, this projection is something that you still have to have your own seichel. The Rambam can't help you. Halacha 9. When we speak about the width of a finger breadth, whenever we speak about an etzba, who etzba gudel habeinani, it's the average size thumb. And if you want to put it into another part of nature, it's the width of 7 barley corns when they are placed one next to the other, but very cramped. Or if you take 2 barley corns and place them length to length, but the harchavadik, that's the width of a beinani gudel. Tefach that we speak about b'chol makim, it's 4 of such etzbois. That's what we said. And every amma is 6 tefach. Okay. Halacha Yud. Sefer Torah shekasafti ani. The Rambam says, I wrote a Sefer Torah. Roichav kol daf adaf midap of arba etzbois. So here, first of all, it's interesting. The Rambam is writing how wide. He's not speaking about the Yiriyah. The Rambam for sure did it 6. In his writing, according to the thickness of his parchment, it worked out that every column was 4 etzbois. Now, by the way, when you hear this, you can know the size of the letters, because the Rambam already wrote that we write on every line 30. It doesn't have to be 30, because there can be blank spaces. Enough space to write 30 letters. It's gewaldig. So, Arba Etzbois. And Shiras Hayam v'Shiras Hazinu, there, Reichav Kol Adaf Mishteim, was Sheish Etzbois. Uminyan Hashitim Shebechol Daf Adaf. Now that we have the 6 tfachim, you have the 24 etzbois. So according to this, it's going to be achas v'chamishim. And again, the Rambam tells you that it can vary between, he said 48 and 60. By him it came out that how many lines do you have in every column? In the Rambam Sefer Torah, 51. Uminyan hadafim shekol ha-sefer, how many columns did the Rambam end up with? Masayim v'shisha v'esrim daf. 26 columns. And the oirach kol ha-sefer, if you were to measure, the oirach kol ha-sefer means what we would call the width, going back to the columns, to the yiriyos. Reichav oirach. V'elef u'sholosh meis v'shishim v'sheish etzbois b'kiruf. Kabbalah. Now the Rambam says, if someone is going to actually confirm this, he's going to see that it's not true. That the Rambam has 6 extra fingers. Based on everything that Rambam said, he should not have ended up with 1366. Should have ended up with 1360. But you needed another 6, because what the Rambam didn't specify until now was how many finger breadths do you need to wrap around the Eitz HaChaim. The Elu Hashesh Etzbois HaYiseiris B'Cheshbon LaGilyan Shebetchilas V'Soifoi. It's the use for the margin in the beginning and at the end. The beginning has a margin, the width, and the end has a margin. The ha'oire shekosavnu b'hem were made out of ram skins. ובזמן שתרצה לכתוב על פי המידות האלוהי קרוב למעט, הם חסר דף אחד ושניים ושלושה. The Rambam says that if you're trying to do what I did, you can be off by 2 or 3 columns, and it won't change the hekeder for karkai. The whole pedic is to make the total circumference like the height. Few columns, taka won't make a difference. Or yeser daf, or shnayim or shalosh, more or less. Leitiga, it won't make a difference. It's not going to take away this hidur. V'leitia tzarech lecheshbon, you don't even have to cheshbon. Elamayad yovi lecha orkoi kekefoi. Halacha yud beis ein oisen b'idea pachas mishleisha dafim. Oh, now let's go. Don't make in one piece of parchment less than 3 columns. Don't make more than 8. And if, now this is in nature. What happens if you have one that on it you can fit 9? The Rambam says don't use that, cut it off. Don't worry about it. You made the cheshbon by making the coil. Whatever you'll cut off now, you'll have to add the exact amount later. Won't matter. So cut it in the middle. Here he's writing cut it in the middle, because since the minimum is 3, 9, if you divide 9 in middle, both of them are usable. One will have 4, one will have 5. That we want to have that minimum amount that's in the beginning or at the end, or in the beginning and in the middle. When it comes to the end, the Rambam is gavaldik. Comes to the end, maybe you're only going to have 1 column left. You can't say what you do, rewrite the whole Sefer Torah. But at the end of the Sefer Torah, even one pasuk, bedaf echad, oisen oisem daf lavade v'toifrin oisay imshor hayiriyos. You can do that because that's who you have. It came out that way. And the Rambam decided himself, but even if you're going to use his cheshbonis, you're going to be off 3 or 4 columns when it comes to the totality of the Sefer Torah, because in the millimeters, a letter bigger or smaller will make that difference. It could be it's going to come out by you that at the end, you're only going to have 1 column left. What should you do? So then you're going to add a yiriyah only for 1 column. Halacha Yud Gimel. When you sew the parchments together, sinews of behemo michaya tohira, even if they themselves were not slaughtered, they are nevelos to trefa shalem, which is mamish kederach shetoifrin asatfilim. Rambam says you should know this, that you have to sew it with sinews. If you didn't sew it together with these sinews, even post facto, that's not a hidur mitzvah. It's not the hekefei ka'arkoi. It's possible. The beauty is it's relatively easy to fix. Even I can fix it, because then you just have to undo the old string. When you sew it, when you sew the height of the, you don't begin on the top. When you're sewing 2 pieces of parchment together, if you were to sew top and bottom, it's going to be so tight that when you put pressure, it might rip open. Leaving a little bit open on the top and on the bottom, fakert, rach kekana, not kosher like a cedar. You're allowing it to be more malleable. You also have to make shnei amudim shel eitz, 2 dafke wooden poles. We mentioned that al pi Kabbalah, even the ink has to come from a tree product. There's something about trees. Which is why you'll never even be able to measure in the shul whether it's arkoi ka'kefoi, which is a good thing. So when you buy today Sifrei Torah, you can't even criticize the sefer. You don't know what you're doing. You'll never know. You don't know because then the thickness of the wood. If you don't know, unless you take out the Atzei Chaim and you roll it all together, you cannot verify that.
Ship it. Usually ship that.
Yeah, but they shouldn't ship it to people that learn the Rambam, because then we're gonna measure it. Now, how do you sew the parchment on these Atzei HaChaim, also with sinews? Then you wrap, in other words, it's sewed on, and then the whole thing is wound around the Eitz HaChaim, and some space should be left between the Atzei HaChaim and the beginning of your columns. Final halacha tezvav. Sefer Torah shenikra boy yiriyah b'soich shtei shitos. The way I understand it is that it tore down the length, but it tore in between 2 lines, obviously in between letters. So tore down or torn up. The tear is lengthwise, but it went into the lines. So if it's only in between 2 lines, then you can sew it up. If it's in between 3 lines, you may not sew it up. Let's clarify this. That if it's 3, you cannot. It's only if the Sefer Torah is old. She'ein afatzei nikr. The definition of old there is that when the parchments are relatively young, you can tell that they were treated with this efetz, with this walnut juice. And therefore, if it rips, all you see is a tear. A tear is not really a problem. The reason why, if the tear is too long, it's not good, that's because it could give the appearance that it is because of the age of the parchment that it's starting to tear apart. Like when things begin to rot, it begins to tear up, and that's already not nice. So if you can see the golnut, no one is going to think it's machmasri kavan. It can be even more. But now that you can't see the golnut, so it has the bad appearance. Avalam nikra gvil shu afuds, then toifer, even kara, that goes into 3 lines. V'chein ben daf lo daf, if the tear did not go inside a column, it went in between columns. Or ubein teva la teva, right? Imamish in between letters. It doesn't matter. It's about the length of 2 shitas good, 3 shitas not. V'chol hakiroyim, if it did tear and you could sew it up, also ein toifen noisem ela begidin, the same type of gidin that you use. Shatoifen hayiriyah zuluzu, that will be the same type of string that you'll use to tie, to fix, to amend the scroll. Make sure that even though we tolerate a certain height of the length of the tear, that it should not have gone through a letter proper. or it did not even change the form of the letter, that's a whole different parsha that will invalidate, and that can be fixed by fixing up the letter. Final Perek today, Perek Hasidi. Perek Hasidi has 11 halachas. Now we're going to learn, this is the final Perek. The Rambam is going to make a sachak, a sikum, always with numbers. There are 20 factors that invalidate a Sefer Torah, and he's going to conclude about the great kedusha of the Sefer Torah and the need of designating a makom for the Sefer Torah, and any place that's being meshamesh, the Sefer Torah has the status of tashmishe kedusha. Tashmishe kedusha are so holy that when they are no longer usable, they have to be buried, unlike tashmishe mitzvah that can be thrown away. Let's go, Perek Hasidi, again 11 halachas, beginning with halacha aleph. Putting all the halachas together, Nimtzei Solamed, my friends, is not only from the first chapter we learned yesterday, which is Perek Zayin, and today's 3 Prakim, or Zayin Chestes. The Nimtzei Solamed is from Perek Aleph, because the Rambam mentioned certain dinim in the beginning. We're going to take dinim that we learned when we wrote about writing the tefillin. It comes out that all together, she'esrim devarim heim, she'bechol echad mehem, any one of the above is not met, the Sefer Torah is possible. All of them are essential. And what happens if that happened? Indeed, Shmuel, you asked that. Well, pasul means it does not have the kedusha of a Sefer Torah, but on the other hand, it's God's words written. So they have the status of a chumash that is used to teach tinoikas. The ein boy kedusha Sefer Torah, and the most important nafkamina will be the ein koydim boy barabim. When it comes, let's say, to Geniza, even a Chumash, even today, even they're printed, you have to be goynez it, you can't throw it out. Anything that's used for the writings of Tanakh is called Tashmisha Kedusha. Anything else that's used for a mitzvah is called Tashmisha Mitzvah. That's simple klal. Now, when you speak about something in service of Tanakh, there are many steps. You know, you have the Aron HaKodesh, Tashmisha Kedusha. But then you have the floor under the Aron HaKodesh. Like there's going to be a point, as we'll see later, that it's servicing something else that's servicing something else that's servicing the Sefer Torah. It will no longer have the status of Tashmisha Kedusha. Okay, now the Elohim here, the Gavaldik. Here are the 20. Number 1, im nichtav al or behema tameya. The parchment cannot be from a non-kosher animal species. Halacha number 2, she nichtav al or behema tahira, but it was not processed. It must be. Now, by the way, this is for the Sefer Torah. This is for halacha 3. Shohaya mu'ubad shalei l'shem Sefer Torah. Even if it was processed, it has to be done l'shem Sefer Torah. Halacha number 4. Shenichtav shalei b'makom ksiva. What does it mean? So if you're using the gvil, which is the totality of the parchment, right? You have to write it b'makam haseir. If you wrote it b'makam habasar, it's invalid. If you're using klaf, I'm sorry. Me'umad means tanned. It has to be tanned. If not, the zuama is still in it. Okay, so if you're using a vil, so one thing is clear, guys, you may never write the words of stam on the place of the hide that was physically touching the flesh. So if you have one thickness, you have to write it to makam haseir. But if you're using the klaf, the beauty of the klaf is the upper layer. So you don't want to write it to makam haseir. You want to write it with the place that was facing the flesh. You can write it there because it's not duchsustus, because it wasn't physically laying on the flesh. So it's possible if you wrote it b'makam haseir. Halacha hey. Now, by the way, the Rambam doesn't write duchsustus because the Sefer Torah may not be written on duchsustus. Either gevil or klaf, you have to write it on the right side. Halacha 5, 5th rule: shenichtav miksasi ala gevil miksasi ala klaf. You're not allowed to do that. You have to be consistent. The entire Sefer Torah has to be written on the same type of parchment. 6, if you wrote the Sefer Torah on duchsustus, even if it's all on duchsustus, which is the bottom part of the half, the one that was actually laying on the flesh, even though that the mezuzah, they would write on the duchsustus, but now, by the mezuzah, shalei b'makam habasar. That part that was touching flesh may never be used. Halacha 7, shenichtav v'loy sirtut. You didn't make this a ruled or indentation. 8, shenichtav v'loy shachar ha'omer. You need to have black ink that remains without fading. Ideally, we learn it should be a black ink that remains without fading, but it's erasable. That was the ideal. The other options, they're good, they're black, they don't fade, but you can't erase them. The problem is that if it becomes invalid, boop, you're stuck at checkmate. You can't fix it. Halacha tes shenichtav v'shar l'shoynas. Even though the Rambam theoretically already said that you could write the Sefer Torah, Ezra allowed the Sefer Torah to be written in the original Lashon Yavanis, but since Lashon Yavanis nowadays got completely lost, now you can make this blanket statement. The only language is the Holy Tongue. 10, Shekasavei min, if it was written by a non-believer or other similar as we learned above, Bishar Psulim. Halacha Yud Aleph, Shekasav askaris v'loy kavana. When you wrote God's holy names, you did not write it with the kavana l'shem kedushas Hashem. Yud beis shekchisa, even one letter. Yud gimel she'oisav afilo ois achas. Yud dalet shenaga ois ba'ois. Tezvav shenifshed atzuras ois achas. It was written properly, but now one form of the letter got ruined or got distorted. Ad, either you can't read it altogether, or the vav looks like the yud now, right? Bein be'ikar aksiva, whether to begin with the Sefer wrote it bad, or because it got perforated, or because it got torn, or because erased, doesn't matter. Right now, even one letter is confused with another letter. Halacha 16, shehirchik or shehikriv bein ois la'ois achatira. Either one word looks like two words, or two words looks like one word. 17, Sheshina Tzuras HaParshis, which is the first Pedic we learned today, Pedic Ches, that you made a psucha into a sasuma, or sasuma into a psucha. Yud Ches, that when you wrote the two songs, you did not write them the way that Rambam described. Sheshina Tzuras HaShiras. 19, Shekasav B'Sha'ar Aksav Keshira, that you wrote any other part of the Torah the way you write these two melodies. And the final, Shetafar HaYiriyos B'Lagidei Torah, that you sewed them together using sinews, but from a non-kosher animal species. And the big kasha is that there was another halacha that Rambam didn't write, and that is that Hashem may not be put on a margin. And there's a lot we learned about what could be put on a margin. The name of God may not be put on a margin. That's the big question. Why didn't the Rambam count that? Especially when you give a number, you have to write all of the dinim. Okay. Halacha 2. Sefer Torah kosher. Once you have a Sefer Torah. So now let's go with the kavod that we afforded. Noyhagin boy kedusha yeseda v'kavod gadol. One way of expressing that is v'aser la'adam limkar Sefer Torah. We're not speaking, my friends, about the Sefer who sells the Sefer Torah for his livelihood. That's not disrespectful. He wrote it for Yidden to buy it, for people to do their mitzvah. According to the Rambam, every Jew has to buy their own Sefer Torah. No. When you bought your Sefer Torah, you may not sell it. Even if you don't have what to eat. And even if you have many other Sifrei Torah. And even if you're selling an old one to buy a new one. Number one, learning Torah with its money means that while you're designating your year or 2 or 10 or 50 learning 24/7, how will you have parnasa? That's the pshat. You're being misparnes yourself from the money of the sale while you're learning Torah the whole time. And number 2, sheyisa isha b'damav, to be able to get married. Because of that nakuda. And this is even if it's second marriage. And this is, according to the Rebbe, even if you fulfilled your mitzvah pru'uravu. Because the Rambam holds, the Rebbe explains that if a person already had a son and a daughter, and even in a new marriage, having more children is part of the mitzvah pru'uravu. And that is done by marriage. However, person cannot say, listen, I have a nice car, but I'm going to sell the Sefer Torah because I'm going to learn for a year. No, if you sell something else, if you have nothing else to sell, then you can sell the Sefer Torah. Halacha 3, Sefer Torah Shabbalah. It got worn out, or it became disqualified. In other words, when it comes to a point that it's unfixable, so the din is, we said Geniza, now he'll describe what that means. And all of this is because of the kavod gadol that we have to be noyig in the Sefer Torah. That you put it in an earthenware container. In other words, it's done like that way, so it should be preserved longer. The kover and oisai knows, unlike a human body, we want for the body to decompose, the sooner the better, naturally. When you bury a Sefer Torah, you put it in the klei cheres. If you remember in the parsha of Shtaris, that Rambam quoted the pasuk, right? We just read the Haftorah that before a Golus Bayis Rishon, do transactions. Either is going to be Golus, document the sales, and put it in a klei cheres and bury it. It's going to be preserved. And where do you bury it? Eitz al Tamid HaChachamim. V'zuhi gnisasei. Then the Rambam writes a gavaldik adin. Mit b'chai svarim shabalu. What we call the mantalach, which is the cloth material that you put directly above a Sefer Torah. That is called Tashmisha Kedusha, that also needs Geniza. So just like you try to bury it near a Talmud Chacham, the Torah itself, what do you do with that? Oisin, oison, tachrichen l'meis mitzvah. You use it for tachrichen l'meis mitzvah, v'zuhi genizosan. Halacha dalad. All right. Tik, shehuchen l'sefer Torah v'hunach b'ay. Tik is what the Sfardim have. They have this beautiful box, whether it's a wooden box, whether it's a silver, metal box, or by Ashkenazim, the mitbuchais, and the ark, the Aron HaKodesh. And or v'hamigdal shamaricham b'yasefer. I'm saying Aron and Migdal because, as we learned before, the Rambam had the Hechel, he had the Teva, was any type of closet which is designated for the storing of the Sefer Torah. Afal pisha Sefer b'teichatik. Even though that the Sefer Torah is not directly in it, especially by the Sfardim, the Sefer Torah is in its standalone box. But it's still called Tashmisha Kedusha. No, that's like we spoke out before, that everything, you can say the whole world is Tashmisha Kedusha. And there's a truth to that, but halachically it has to be near. It can't be too many steps behind. The chair, a chair that was designated to place a Sefer Torah in it. In other words, when you take out two Sefer Torah by the Sfardim, right, to read, and you only read one, I don't know if someone sits and holds it. It's very heavy. So there was a chair designated, you place it on it. Designated and used. Remember before we learned about the tick of the tefillin. Designated, hachana milsa, plus used. They have the status of Tashmisha Kedushahin, and therefore, unlike Tashmisha Mitzvah, when they are unusable, you're not allowed to throw them out. You have to use them, elikishayivlu, if they are unusable, or if they're because they got worn out, or because they broke, they have to have geniza, same thing, they have to be buried. Avala bima is, now how far do you go? Now what bima? The Rambam doesn't use the word bima to what we call bima. Our bima is Tashmisha Kedusha. Our bima is Tashmisha because you put the Sefer Torah on it. Bima means the platform that they would have the Shliach Tzibur standing on holding a Sefer. Not when he daven b'makim namach. There was a place he stood on as a platform. And the luchais that are written for children to learn. Many are of the opinion that the luchais is what we call noyei aron kodesh. In our shul we have luchais with Rashi's letters, dafke, with Aleph Beis Gimel Dalet Hey. And in those days, some people would teach children from that noyei. And even though it's attached to the Aron HaKodesh, and other parts of the Aron HaKodesh, like the Paroiches, is Tashmisha Kedusha, not that. Not that. Ein B'hem Kedusha. V'chein, the Remoinim, the pomegranates, which are made out of silver, made out of gold. Today we have crowns also. By the way, the v'chein is not like the luchais. This is already directly on the Sefer Torah. This is that they are Tashmisha Kedusha. Right? Tashmisha Kedusha. You can't use it for anything else. However, unlike the Sefer Torah proper, that can only be sold either to learn Torah or to marry, this could be sold, and as we learned already in the previous series, Mailam Ba'Kodesh, and the Mailam Ba'Kodesh is to buy a Sefer Torah or even a Chumash. Halacha 5, Sefer Torah al Sefer Torah. You can put one Sefer Torah on another Sefer Torah. It's not taking away the covet of the Sefer Torah, and there's no question that you could put a Sefer Torah on top of a printed Chumash. Chumash is not printed. A Chumash means only one of the 5. Umanichem HaChumashim on top of Nevi'im Ksuvim. But not the reverse. You cannot put a Chumash al Gab Sefer Torah. And that was the Chiddush we learned yesterday, that you are allowed to write the whole Tanakh in one scroll, even though that while you're learning from it, you will have some of the Nach on top of that. Doesn't matter. But here they're separate Sfarim. The Chen Kisvi HaKodesh, even halachos or agodos, may not be thrown out. They are called Tashmisha Kedusha. Tashmisha Kedusha is something on which I said Tanakh, I stand corrected, not Tanakh. Torah is written on it. Hakamein, amulets, sheyesh v'eminyanim shal kisvei HaKodesh, because anything that has on it from Scripture is imbued with a special amount of Kedusha, and we have to be mechabed it. Halacha 6. Person may not hold the Sefer Torah in his arms and enter to the Beis HaMerchetz or to Beis HaKisa, to Beis HaKvaris, even though it's karach b'mitpachos and it's put inside its box. Don't read from it. Or in parentheses, today we said that since we have plumbing, so the dinim of what may not be done outside of Beis HaKisei doesn't apply nowadays. Don't hold the Sefer Torah when you're unclothed. You should know that in the Gemara, there are different statements, people confuse one with the other. There is, I may not be unclothed holding a Sefer Torah, and there's another halach, if you remember the siyum over there, that you may not hold the Sefer Torah when the Sefer Torah is arum. That's also disrespect. That's why the Sefer Torah right away is covered. We don't leave a Sefer Torah unclothed. For Asur Leishav Alamita, you may not even sit down on a bed that a Sefer Torah is on it. Halacha 7. Let's go to the bayis. Bayis does not mean a home. Guys, important. Bayis means the room. A room in which there is a Sefer Torah. The There are dinim, by the way, regarding the building. There are dinim about apartments that are built over as Beis HaKnesses. Many important dinim. That Rambam is not speaking about that here. He's speaking about the room. You can't have marital relations until you take the Sefer Torah out. Or here, if you have no option, put it bekeli v'yitin hakeli b'kli yachad. Keli b'ter keli. For the Rambam, you only need to have 2 kelim. For the Rambam, Sefer Torah and Tefillin are the same. And keli b'ter keli means that you have to make sure that they were not made for. If it was made for, then we already said that by Tefillin, it's considered only 1 keli. If it was designated to house the Sefer Torah, in other words, you have a room. Think about it, an hour Aron HaKodesh. So you can say you have the mitpachos, which it covers. Then you have the doors. Then you have the curtain. No, they are all made for the Sefer Torah. You can even if it would not have been a shul. They are considered 1 keli, and 1 keli is not enough. I want you to know, my friends, nowadays that the mezuzahs that people have in their bedrooms, if it's in, then the din is, that's what we do, is that you put the scroll in a paper that otherwise you would not have put. We said that you put it in a plastic. But if you have a mezuzah in your bedroom, take it out from the box. Whether the back is transparent or not is irrelevant, and have a paper around the scroll. Now it's keli b'ter keli. And if you have no option, you can make a mechitza 10 tvachim, and that's only good if you don't have another house, another room. Making a mechitza is not enough. Halacha 8, kol atmeim. Very important. Afilu nidos. And a goy, mutarim le'echoi sefer Torah. They can hold the sefer Torah and they can read from it. Al pi Kabbalah, there are other inyanim. The Rambam is not writing Al Pi Kabbalah. The Rebbe, we follow also Al Pi Kabbalah held. The Rebbe used to send the Sefer Torah, Simchas Torah to the Ezras Nashim, because the chizur that it gives a woman, follow the halacha. There's nothing wrong if a woman is a nida would actually, he's writing, hold it, read from it, not betzibur. The Rambam says it's asur. Everyone writes it's asur. Kavadat tzibur. She'ein divrei Torah mekabel and tumah. That's why it's not a problem. However, you have to be physically clean. V'hu shelo yeh yadav metunafos or meluchlachos betit. That's also covered. Ella yirchatzu yedeim b'achar kach yigobay. Halacha 9. Kol aray sefer Torah k'shum halach. When you see the sefer Torah, when the sefer Torah is being carried, you must stop and stand for it. And v'yiu hakoil oimdim, and you have to stand until when? You can't say stand until the sefer Torah is placed down. No. If someone is going to be holding the sefer Torah at a certain location, then you stand until the sefer Torah stops where it's going. When it comes to his place. Or until when you cannot see it anymore. And only then can you sit down. Halacha Yud, second to last halacha. Mitzvah liyachad l'sefer Torah makim. You have to designate a place for a sefer Torah. Guys, you know how we'll learn pshat? And to honor and to glorify that place. The makim in which you put the sefer Torah, let's call that the Aron HaKodesh. That's how much honor. We're machabed the Aron HaKodesh. You know, one thing the Gemara says, by calling it the Aron HaKodesh, and never to call it an Aron, God forbid. What the Chazal have very not positive things that happen. Dvarim shebeluchos. Why? Because you don't, the Rambam writes, because the 10 Commandments are written in it, which has to be understood on what the rest of the Sefer Torah, but the rest of the Torah is also the Word of God. Dvarim shebeluchos abris, ein b'chol sefer v'sefer. Now going v'lo yorek adam keneged sefer Torah, v'lo yigal arvasa keneged, v'lo yafshit raglev kenegdoi. Don't take off your shoes in front of it. That's disrespectful. Nechenu al roish kamasi. Never carry a sefer Torah on your head. Never turn your back to a sefer Torah. Only if the sefer Torah is in a location that's 10 tefachim higher or lower, so you are considered to be in a different halachic domain. Final halacha yud aleph. Hoyim halach memakal lamak. V'sefer Torah imoi. The Rebbe teaches this halacha, I'm being mekatze the Rebbe's Torah, that this halacha is continuing about the makam of the Sefer Torah, that when you're traveling, and the Rambam is writing, don't put a Sefer Torah in a bag, don't put it on your donkey, right, and write on the donkey. What should you do? He's going to write in a second, hold it in your heart, in your arm, right, keneged liboy. The Rambam is really saying that is the makam of the Sefer Torah. You become the place of the Sefer Torah. Only if you are afraid from Ganovim. That means if they see you that you're giving it that much cover, they'll think that it's gold. It's better than gold. And they might go up and hold you up and steal it. So the makom is you. And you can ride on the animal and go. Now, v'al kol mi sheyoyshev lifnei sefer Torah. When you're sitting in front of a sefer Torah, you have to sit b'choyved roish be'emu uvafachad. The Rambam concludes that the Sefer Torah has an effect on the person, similar to what he wrote about the mezuzah, and that is shehu ha'eit hanem l'chol. A scroll, Torah scroll, is the witness, and it testifies not only for Yidden, for the whole world. That what? That God chose the Jewish people and gave us the Torah. Shenemar v'hoyasham l'chol eid, and therefore, if it is an aid and it has an effect on you, so reciprocate v'yichabdeu k'fi koichai. And amru chachamim harishonim kol ha'mechalas ha'Torah, God forbid, by desecrating the Torah, including not giving honor to the Torah and to its makayim, gufa mechol al abriyos. V'kol ha'mechaberes ha'Torah gufa mechuber al abriyos. And indeed, now we concluded brich rachmana desayon, and tomorrow we are beginning with Hilchas Tzitzis. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.